We are here on this panel today to discuss how technology and data are foundational to brands and retailers, which should come as no surprise because given how foundational technology is in any other business outside of cannabis. But over the last several years, as more state markets have become legal, the landscape of technology has been changing at a rapid clip. And we're hopeful today that we can help educate and demystify cannabis data for some of our brands and retailers that are listening in today, and also hopefully give some insights to the technology providers and investors around some of the unmet needs still from brands and retailers in the industry. So excited to have our panelists here today. I'm your moderator. My name's Annie Davis, and I am the CEO and founder of a strategy consultancy called Growing Impact that serves the legal cannabis industry. I've been in the industry for about 4 years now, professionally, but as a consumer for many more than I can count. And I'm going to ask everybody on the panel about one thing that drew them to the cannabis industry. And for me, it was when I became a mother and realized kind of once again how supportive cannabis was to my own mental health and well-being. And it really gave me a deep passion for destigmatizing the plant and making it more accessible to more new moms and women specifically for women's health. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeremy.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Jeremy. I work for Dispense, which is one of the e-commerce platforms in the cannabis space. I was kind of born into cannabis, but I would say like what drew me to work into it or work in it professionally was just having an impact and being able to be part of like being able to be part of it being legal. You know, I saw a lot of the bad things that can happen from it being federally illegal and the consequences of that. And so being able to have a chance to shape the industry in a positive way was really why I wanted to join the recreational side of things.
Christine, your turn.
Hi, I'm Christine de la Rosa. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the People's Ecosystem, the managing member of the People's Group Fund, and also just an operator. And I say that because a lot of times when people are speaking, they're not operating necessarily. And so operators have a very unique perspective, especially around technology. And so my background is as a database architect. I did that until I got really sick and had to stop working, and then did a bunch of medications, and then found cannabis, and then transitioned my entire medical regimen to cannabis. So that's how I got into the cannabis industry, was by trying to find alternative health options than what they were giving me at the time. And so that's what makes me passionate, is the medical piece of cannabis, because in every culture, cannabis is an ancestral medicine. It's a medicine that our great-great-great-grandmothers used. My grandmother used it. And so the fact that that has been denied to us as a country is really harmful. And so my goal is to really help us legalize in a way that is good for everybody who wants to use cannabis as alternative medicine.
Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Danny Gold. I'm co-founder and CEO of Zoltrain. We put everything we do as a tech provider in the space under the umbrella of brands activating retailers. So a lot of that is around budtender training, because we know budtenders are key influencers making the recommendations, but it also extends out to the digital side of experiential. If you're hosting pop-ups that are educational, QR codes, we've got brands that have integrated training into their packaging, where it's learn how to consume this, learn about the dosing, and we're powering those experiences. And much more from the critical intersection that we're talking about today of brands and retailers, and the intersection of how we can get the right products into people's hands, really powering educated purchase decisions. My background is tech, so I've been in the somewhat boring world of behind the scenes B2B tech my whole career, which is the relevance here. And as far as cannabis, us and our company are based in Denver, based around Colorado. I've been in Colorado since medical legalization came through. I've had my med card since the opening days of that market. And as a tech founder, we're always looking at underserved opportunities. And it kind of just blew my mind, even going into dispensaries early on. I remember going in and having somebody say, hey, I know you work in tech. Can you help me with my point of sale? Can you help me figure out how to set this up? Can you help me figure out how to, reboot my server over here to take an order? And I just realized how underserved the market was from a tech side, because traditional providers couldn't take the money from cannabis operators and couldn't transact with plant touching. And to me, that was a big opening, getting to know a lot of operators and just hearing the stories of the things they didn't have access to that needed to be built new into cannabis, and providers and vendors that could serve them. Yeah, it was mainly horror stories. I was a tech therapist for
Thanks so much, Danny. Well, that's a great way to lead into my next question, which is just kind of to set the stage for our audience, many of whom are on live stream and we're not sure exactly where you play in the industry. Just want to take a moment to talk about like the landscape of technology currently in cannabis and kind of the areas of the supply chain that it touches. So Jeremy, can you give us some examples of some areas within the cannabis ecosystem where there are currently technology providers and solutions either existing or under development?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all really starts at the seed to sale level. Each state has a chosen seed to sale tracking system, metric, BioTrack, leaf data systems, and that's kind of like where all the data really starts. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday in some of the talks, but where the data should be the most clean and like the true source of the data, but oftentimes it's not. And then from there, it usually flows into POSs on the retail side. And then from the POSs, it'll go to things like e-commerce, loyalty, ad tech platforms, and then education and training, like what Danny's doing. So the data is usually distributed, kind of seed to sale, and POS is kind of where it starts, but then it's distributed out to all these other platforms. And if it's not right at the seed to sale level or the POS level, it can affect everything along that chain. So I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Danny, in your experience with Zoltrain and working with the brands in your portfolio, what are some of the types of data that they're finding most useful, and what are the mechanisms through which they're currently obtaining that data?
So the brand side of the world, it's really anything they can get because they don't have enough and they don't have direct access to it. If we talk about what's important, they'll take whatever they can get. They're kept in the dark so much, but I would say some of the efforts right now in brands are, how can I gain a new customer? So how can I track if I got a net new customer? And we'll see brands even define that as maybe somebody who hasn't purchased in the last 6 months. So it might be a win back. We're not always slicing and dicing because it gets a little fuzzy with how that data goes across. Do they buy at this dispensary and go over to this dispensary? That picture is really hard to put together. But from a brand perspective, you want to track your customers and you want to track to, am I getting loyalty? I think there's a lot of discussion about, do we have any brand loyalty in cannabis yet? And we're still in the early stages of that, even in the best of the best. We're just very, very, very early in that. But brands want to know, did I gain a customer? So did my marketing efforts and my activation, did my new product get in the hand of somebody that I can call a new customer? And then are they a repeat purchaser? So any data that they can get that kind of shows is what I'm doing working. Did I set expectations well, right? So that's from the marketing, the activation, the education. Did I tell you what to expect with my products and why you should try them and why they might be for you? The expectation setting, that can get me a new customer. And then the repeat is, were they met? Is my product good, right? And you have to, of course, transact on both of those to grow a business and get that all-important repeat customer. But I think I see brands really focusing on how can I get that data, because at the best, they really only have wholesale data. They have really, trailing indicators of, okay, I got a big order 2 months ago. I don't have a lot of insight into what's happening with those products sitting in inventory. So we have a big gap from what they really have firsthand to what they want to see, which is just that user and customer behavior in there.
Are there any tools that, does any of the three of you are aware of right now that help to solve this problem of kind of like what happened with my brand once I sold it to wholesale? And anyone can jump in.
Yeah.
The only ones that I really know of, I mean, you've got technology providers like Spring Big or Alpine or Happy Cabbage that kind of facilitate retail and brand partnerships. POS systems like Trees are starting to kind of expose some of that data, but it's still up to the brands to have that relationship with the retailer to access it,
Right.
which is part of the problem. You know, it's just it's so hard for brands to get it. And so you really have to focus on building those retail relationships because a lot of the data lies with the retailer.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, Jeremy, right, you mentioned some of the kind of the marketing activation side, right? The companies that let you, for lack of a better word, sponsor a message through a retailer because the retailer owns the consumers. So you see those providing ROI data on did it lead to a purchase. Somebody that we've partnered with most recently that we're excited about that also is pushing part of this is Sparkplug on like retail sales incentives. And they'll show that. That's a way to kind of track. I've got an activation which might include, you know, training some bud tenders, providing an incentive for units moved through the store, and maybe some sponsored messaging there, and then tracking, okay, under that, you know, promotional activity, how many products were moved and what was the velocity through there? Did I clear out of inventory? So it's still early from that, and it's still hard to find the right incentives where retailers will share that data with the brand. There's a little friction still in there about who has access to that data.
Yeah. Well, Christine, your company has both retail and brands. So I'm curious, you know, what types of data do you find most useful within your organization, at, I guess, both the retail and the brand level? And then do you have kind of a perspective on this brand retailer relationship?
Yeah, it's been really difficult being on both sides of the aisle on that because there is no way for brands to own their customers, which is what Danny was saying. It's really the retailers that own the customers. And in my opinion, you really never want that to be the case. If we were a CPG market, we would be able to connect directly to our customers. And the problem that's really hard is when people do activations in any other industry, they're doing activations at South by Southwest. They're doing activations at Sundance. We're doing activations in the store A, B, and C on road this thing that only has this many customers. We're not able to really activate at a national level or even at a state level, right? And so that's a real problem, even for retailers. Like retailers, that's also a problem. The fact that I have to go to every place that I have brands in and just stand there and hope that somebody wants to come up to my table and then rely on the fact that the bud tenders are going to be our sell-through, where they're selling through 40, 50, 100 SKUs. This is not a sustainable model for retailers, and it's not a sustainable model for brands. And so for me, having done both and doing both, I just think it's a recipe for failure. And that's the thing that's the hardest thing to be, because I used to sling cannabis in the streets. We were in the legacy market, right? And so that was so much easier. Like it was so much easier. And so when I'm looking at tech, it's like, how is tech going to help me? I'm looking for the tech folks in the world, and I'm a tech folk myself, to solve for the problem about how the brands own their customer. Like I need a Beyonce type move where you're like, you only get free sale tickets if you sign up for my email list. I need that kind of tech, even though that seems like really lo-fi. I need to literally be able to connect with my consumer because I don't have commercials. I don't have Instagram. I don't even have TikTok. Like if you say flower on TikTok, they mute me every time. I've tried all the euphemisms. And so I think that's the big thing. I mean, it's a big problem that needs to be solved. And we're at a tech conference and I want to talk to every tech person, solve this problem. How does a brand own it and not have to use a Discord server?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I hinted yesterday on a different panel, kind of on a similar topic. And when asked about kind of the data that I would find most useful, it really was like consumer insights, which seems so basic. Like not just general consumer insights, but like insights on who is actually buying my brand and not just demographics, but a lot more information on them in a way that we have been able to get that in traditional CPG and other industries very easily for reasons that you mentioned, but is so challenging in cannabis for brands to know, not simply attribution, but even just at the very basic level.
Yeah.
Not just like who I think I'm speaking to, but who is actually the person going in and buying that. Which leads me to my next question around e-commerce, because that is potentially an area where you can gather more information. And so Jeremy, given your work with Dispense and your experience, curious about kind of some of the ways that you find e-commerce in cannabis today, either solving some of these challenges or, being at least an area where we can access more data.
Yeah, I think e-commerce is one of the few areas where we can kind of level the playing field, actually. Christine, you mentioned you can't really use these traditional channels, but what you can use is Google. And that's really where brands or retailers can own the customer journey right from the start. If you have a killer brand, you need to own that search term. I'll pick on Jungle Boys for a second. If you search Jungle Boys on Google, most of the top results on page 1 are counterfeit sellers. It's all fake stores where you can buy a pound online and they'll ship it to you, and you can pay with a credit card, like not legit at all. And Jungle Boys they have a killer brand. People love them, but they don't own that online experience. And that's unfortunate, because that's one of the few channels that you really can truly own. That's why I really love the e-commerce side of things and tend to focus on it. That being said, there's still tons missing from that experience, because a lot of the e-commerce providers hold that data hostage, if you will, from brands and retailers too. So that, for me, that's what we focus on at Dispense, is like exposing that data to all of our customers and sharing it with brands, retailers, and everybody through that process chain.
Yeah. So what would be like an example of like the types of data that you might gather from your work in Dispense, and that would be that you would, freely share or share with your partners that would be of use for them?
Yeah, I think there's two really clear examples, and one, it's product level data. So being able to take the data that's in your POS system and expose it to the e-commerce platform so that you can rank on Google for those searches. But then one that connects both brands and retailers would be like abandoned cart data. As the e-commerce platform, we can see when somebody looked at an item, added an item to a cart, but maybe didn't check out. And so we can expose that via an API, which we're doing now for the first e-commerce platform to do that. So we're doing that now, and we're working with people like Spring Big, Alpine IQ, Happy Cabbage, CannaVersions, to pass that information along to them. So now as a retailer, I can go, oh my gosh, I've had 1,000 people over the last 2 weeks look at these Wana gummies, but they haven't checked out. Let me go talk to Wana and see if we can work out a marketing campaign to push them to actually buy those products. So that is probably one of the things that I'm super excited about, because that type of system is available in traditional sales channels or other industries, but not in cannabis. And we're finally getting to the point where we can do these things that other people have been doing for decades.
Except we have to physically deliver it. We don't get to ship it. And that's the big issue for me with e-commerce. I love e-commerce. I want to do e-commerce so bad. But like the level of capital needed to be able to deliver, and even like the onboarding capital that you need to onboard to the cannabis e-commerce sites it's really a block instead of a help. So that's the only thing I wish that we could ship, even if it's just within the state, because it would make e-commerce for me as a retailer and as a brand would make me much more comfortable, but trying to figure out, and then a lot of the e-commerce require that you just put a bunch of stuff in their warehouse, which I understand, right? They want to be able to pull it out and do the delivery, but it's just so chunky, I'm not chunky, clunky, and it's just difficult. And I'm like, why does even e-commerce have to be difficult?
Yeah, it's a very thin veneer of e-commerce that we have in cannabis, right? And there's a lot of providers doing as much as we can, because so much of this is regulatory still, right? Of, the data you just talked about, Jeremy, we heard yesterday that when you look at sales, right, foot traffic is still the most important. And pre-orders on e-commerce are really the transactions that are happening, right? There is delivery out there, but it's such a small slice. And even the, pandemic increase in that was probably smaller than people expected, and it trailed off a lot faster than people expected. So it didn't get delivery to a point where, okay, now we have delivery, that's solved, and it's, now we've got that to build off of. It kind of, it's there, but it fizzled out a bit.
Yeah, for context too, like when I say e-commerce, I definitely mean it in a limited and restricted way. Like we're selling weed online, but you can't pay online 90% of the time, and then you can't ship it.
Pick it up. Yeah, and then you drive to the store and pick it up.
So like, it is a goofy thing to call it e-commerce.
Yeah. And it's pre-order, and it's not even closed out, which is good for the store, right? Because you can upsell them when you get there and still shop. I hear a lot from the data you look at it from consumers that a lot of the reasons they're doing the pre-order is to reserve inventory because there's a product they want, or to check stock because checking stock is hard. So you put it in the cart and you get it there. And you're like, okay, they do have, the gummies I want, and the flavor of the drink I want, or the strain I want. But it's really limiting coming back to the brand side, because the e-commerce, like I said, D2C and some of the delivery methods aside, they're definitely there, but they are very, very, very small slice of the industry right now. The brands don't really have a play. They have some exposure. They can do some things. You can get some search terms and some SEO there, so you get some exposure. But it's another place where the brands are actually cut out of the data. To your point, Christine, I can't get, as a brand, as far as I know, there's no e-commerce platform that a retailer is running that would let me get a consumer signed up to follow the brand and capture that data. You're going to be blocked out of that. It's going to be rented back to you at some point. So your pre-sale ticket code, you can't get that unless you embed an online menu as a brand. And that's been so limited. People shop at the retailers. People want to go to the dispensary website and search for the brands, but there's no way to capture data directly as a brand in the e-commerce flows that people are using today. And that's extremely limiting.
Even in California, where you have D2C possible, a lot of the brands are renting their e-commerce platform, unfortunately, and they're still not even customers of the brand. They're customers of that technology provider. So it's a very weird situation.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about like data ownership and where the ownership and the control of this data kind of currently sits within the cannabis ecosystem. Christine, with your background as a data architect, curious your perspective and kind of what you see working in terms of how data is organized and owned, and where you see challenges. And I think I know where you're going to come down, but I still want to hear you say it.
Well, it's such an interesting thing. I mean, Jeremy, and what we're saying all up in here is like, and Danny was saying was like, we need to own the customer data, and that's across the way, right? So people, like you said, can go, like I have to go pick it up at a dispensary, and that's good for the dispensary. But is it good for the brand? It's not really good for the brand, because I might be in SoCal and I want to get a brand that's only in NorCal, right? And I love this brand and I love this weed, and I can't really do that because that would require them through an e-commerce platform to drive it to SoCal, right? So like that doesn't make any sense. So I think that to me right now, and this is just me, there is really no good way for brands to become dominant because we are at the mercy of retailers and doing both, right? I'm like not shading any retailers, but really I want to have a brand that people go into the retailers and ask if they have that brand. Right? I don't want it to be the other way around where the retailers are like, we may carry you if you give us 50% off and 70,000 pre-rolls for free. Like that's not helpful for brands, And so I look very much in NorCal. We just had a big meeting of all of the female-owned brands in NorCal about how we're going to pull, we do a lot of stuff community-wise, how we pull all the brands together and get them wanted by consumers so that the consumers are going into the dispensaries and asking for the brands. Like, how do we motivate? Because 52% of women in the United States are millennials, 52%. It's a big number, right? 78% across all non-white ethnicities are the legal consumers of cannabis in the US, 78%. And I was so shocked. I had to find that number for a deck I was doing. I was like, wow, but where is our folks being able to capture those folks in the legal market? I'm not even talking about legacy, in the legal market, so that we can market to them. It becomes imperative for us as brands and as retailers to understand that we should be in a very good relationship together. And I don't feel like that's how it is with brands right now and retailers. And I get it, retailers are squished. Like they're the only part of the supply chain that can take the least amount of deductions on their IRS. So they are stressed. I get it. But wouldn't it be helpful if they were not so stressed and the brands could help drive traffic to their stores? Because we own the data of our customers and we can be like, oh, these 100 customers are in the area of this dispensary. And I can tell them, because we have geo-tracking, I can say, hey, we just put a new drop in this store. Go there to grab it because you've bought this 17 times in the last 4 months. That's the kind of data we need. That geo-tracking data, that data that tells us exactly where to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, we're never going to get to a point where you can have any really degree of brand loyalty if you simply cannot find the brand that you want or that best fits you at more than like one retailer, and then it's out of stock and then you go to somebody else.
Yeah.
Danny, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, medically, when you're thinking about this, you know, when we're talking about consumers, sometimes we're just talking about recreational, but I think a lot about medical because that's how I use it. And imagine if you can't find your medicine. This is the medicine that you've used for the last 2 months, 4 months, and it works for you, and now you don't know where it is.
Yeah. Danny, curious your perspective on kind of data challenges and any potential creative solutions that you've seen by brands or retailers.
Yeah, I think, you know, Kristen, we heard it yesterday too about community, right? You're talking about this NorCal and women-owned brands and getting together and leveraging the power of that community to tie into the community, build awareness, which is important and needs to always be done. And it sucks that it's the only tool. It's just, you know, do we get people together at an event where we probably can't even consume or try the products because we blocked around that to talk about why people should like these products, right? The NorCal, you have a little easier on some of the consumption side, but
Yeah.
that gets so challenging. But one thing we do talk about is when you do those activities, which are going to happen, when you do an activation, when you do an event, zero party data, right? You talk about all these different levels of data and we won't bore you with defining it. But a lot of what we're talking about is renting data. You know, I hear Jeremy, you say that all the time. I say it all the time. Brands, the only thing they can really do is rent data from somebody else. Can I rent it from the e-commerce? Can I rent it from the retailer's text message list? Can I rent it from a programmatic buy? None of this is your data. And most of those channels won't let you acquire data through doing that. You're just renting it for a very short period of time. So anywhere a brand can, they should directly collect data.
Yep.
And we're talking like very grassroots, like it's a tech panel. We're just talking like throw a QR code and a link anywhere you are. If you are sitting at that table at a pop-up in a store as a brand and you don't have a QR code somewhere where somebody can find out about your product and sign up for a mailing list where you now own that email address, that's one of the only channels you have. And if you're not doing it, you're missing out on a ton of value. Even if it's 1,000 people, I hear from brands sometimes, oh, we're not really doing a lot of mailings. We don't have DTC. I don't care. In 3 months, you might have a message to send to them and you're going to wish you had even 1,000 email addresses. So collect it all, every channel, throw a QR code on everything. Anytime you have a physical activation, which is so much of all that's available, you know, when you're hosting the, you know, fantastic women brands in Northern California, make sure people can sign up, make sure that those lists are shared and that your terms share with all brands, collect it.
So we got all the women together and every one of us wrote down every dispensary our brand was in. And when we did that, there was 300 dispensaries that were not overlapping. Right. So I'm like, okay, 300 dispensaries. So now I don't just go in and do my brand. I do your brand. I do your brand. As a collective, we have more power, right?
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with that. The only thing I hate about mailing lists is that they get thrown to spam so often.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I want that connection.
Yep.
that one-on-one, like,
Yeah.
I can tell you how many text messages I get from Sephora. Sephora sends me text messages every day and I never could stop.
Right.
I'm like, I haven't bought Sephora in a long time, but I might want to have Sephora sometimes. And if it's 15%, I need to have that text message.
Yeah.
I want that to be
Yeah.
for our brands as well.
Yeah.
For cannabis brands to be like, man, they're giving me another text message, but they might have Pink Jesus. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And I want to know that.
Yeah.
I want to know that.
Yeah.
And so for me, I wish we could do text messaging. I've
Yeah.
been on many platforms. I always get thrown off or they get thrown off.
Yeah.
But like, that is the closest touch point to somebody.
Yeah.
That or if you have an app, which of course we can't have an app.
Right.
But if you have an app in the store, that would be the other way, right?
Yep.
So
Jeter is really the only brand that I see consistently messaging customers.
Mhm.
And I wish more brands would do it. By the way,
but how do they do it? Because like I've gotten thrown off Philo, I've gotten thrown off.
Yeah, it's just whack-a-mole. There's,
Yeah.
email.
Yeah. And you have,
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
and all the problems I think one key in the panel is there's no perfect solutions. There's not even decently good solutions for most of what we're talking about. We're just like taking what you can get. You can message, it gets shut down. You can do it. You can email, it's going to go to spam sometimes and email is not going to have the best click through, but you have to gather that information and push the messages when you can.
Yeah.
And also all those forms and surveys are so much zero party data about being able to ask that consumer
Yeah.
what you liked, what you thought. One thing that we're starting to see that I think is interesting with brands that I know it's done, and Annie, like I know you did this with the brands you worked with, but it's so early, is basic market research. When you're testing a new label, you're testing new packaging, you're testing a new product. Who are the experts that you're pulling aside from consumers, from bud tenders? All of these lists can be used in these ways that we just haven't really gotten to, but I think we're starting to. But just collect the data, ask for it.
But it feels so random because like, yes, 2 days ago, Charlene, who's my co-founder, went to a dispensary in Sacramento to do a PAD, right? At that time called PADs, but now they're just activations. And so she's talking to the bud tenders and she's training them. It's all exciting. And then the bud tender tells her, we did not know this. They're like, we really like your gummy because you're only the second one of two gummies in the California that doesn't put sugar on their gummy.
Mm.
We did not know that. You want to know why we didn't know that? Because there's 447 brands of gummies in California, and I didn't taste all of them, but the bud tender knew. So that was the data we
Yeah.
could grab.
Yeah.
And like now I'm about to put a whole campaign out. We're one of two. It's us and Kiva. What?
Yeah.
Like that's good because we're
Yeah.
a small brand. Kiva's a behemoth. So, things like that, but that's random
Yeah.
because I didn't have anything to look up.
And that's a
As
perfect.
a tech person,
Yeah.
aren't you just so annoyed by that? Because
Yeah.
you could fix it like
Well,
this.
also that is what we do. So that one specifically we can talk about the bud tender connection and the bud
Yeah.
tender feedback. But I'll bring that in because I think that's a great story about any product, right? Even tech products. It's really not what you say about your company. It's listening to what other people say. That's the truth in the market, right? You can say all you want about your gummies and why they're differentiated or your flour. What are the customers saying? What are they telling their friends? And probably most importantly, what are the bud tenders say? How does a bud tender view your brand? So I'll put that out there as a pool of data that is actually available. So brands, we're talking about how hard is it for a brand to get consumer data? It's really, really hard. What's one of our better proxies for a consumer is the retail employee that's interacting with hundreds of consumers a day in the store. That's your true influencer right now. There's some great influencer things going on. That's a true influencer in the store every day. And talk to them, obviously in person, build the relationships, but talk to them more broadly. I mentioned this market research. It's kind of, a new thing that we want to see more brands doing. Why are you not surveying bud tenders pre-launch about products? Brands put so much energy and so much money into post-launch activities. Did you ask the bud tender if they thought it was a differentiated product? Because they'll probably tell you, and they'll probably be very honest about it. If you see the surveys that we pose in front of bud tenders, they do not hold back, and you want to hear that as a brand.
Yeah, I was, as someone who as a brand worked with Danny and Zoltrain on multiple product launches, I felt like the most valuable aspect of bud tender training was really the first party data on bud tenders.
Yep.
The ability to build our own list of bud tender contacts, even though there's a lot of turnover,
Yep.
even just what they think at this moment in time
Yep.
and at the time of your launch is valuable. And I know brands, I'll talk to brands every day, all the time now, and they're like, yeah, we do bud tender training, we go in person, and it is important to go in person, but there's another benefit to
Yep.
platforms, which is the data capture, and I feel like it's a very undervalued
Yeah.
opportunity.
You're going to do it in person with consumers, with bud tenders, just capture the data and then use it and then send them messages and surveys, incentivize them and ask them questions and get that.
Seems so basic.
Yeah.
And I know you said like we're on a tech panel.
But the issue with that is that the bud tenders consume a lot of product.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to capture the Titas of the world, the aunties of the world, and they are not that demographic,
Correct.
right? So
Yep.
when I'm talking to bud tenders, I get great data for people who are weed heads, for people who have taken all different types of things, but I don't get that data of somebody who's for the first time trying this thing because they have arthritis, or the
Right.
first person trying this because they have ADHD, or the first, you see, and so a lot of that first contact with cannabis gets lost
Mhm.
because the bud tenders are constantly in contact with cannabis. So they don't have that first time I try it, how do I gauge whether this is a good
Yep.
product for me? That's the only thing. And that group of customers, is way bigger
Mhm.
than the current group of customers, and we have to transition them over. Otherwise, we're gonna never be the CPG market we keep telling everybody we're gonna be.
Yep, just going to sell increasingly high THC products to the same people that are buying in their tolerances. No offense to that segment of customers, but you're exactly right. And I think with bud tenders, I heard about this on loyalty on the panel yesterday, talking about, I think it was Amanda with Pioneer was talking about true loyalty and the idea of hospitality and loyalty. We still have to leverage the bud tenders as proxies because we can't get that. And that true hospitality is going to be, can I greet the guests? Can I look up what products they bought? Can I ask them a question? How did that work? Did that, I know you came in last time and you were looking for this. Did you like it? And then being able to put that information somewhere and getting that back to a brand. And I know that's a lot to ask for bud tenders. We're asking a lot for bud tenders, but that, just trying to leverage everything and asking the right questions.
I always think of Nordstrom's. Right, Nordstrom's, if you go on Nordstrom's, there's a pop-up and immediately you have a beauty expert you don't have to be like, send me to, they're already there. They're like, how can we help you buy all the stuff? And I get caught in every time, like, let me buy all the stuff. I want that for our industry. I want the thing where we are just talking to people and getting what they need, because we are recreational, but we are a medicine. And I want to do both. I want to be able to capture them and bring new people over and encourage other people that are longtime users to use our brand, So I think that's really important. Annie, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No.
Who has a question?
We're gonna go to questions and no, go ahead.
It's,
Yeah.
Yep. Retail side, that's a Jeremy question.
Yeah, there are a few people. People do it in different ways. There's like ad tech platforms that will capture device IDs. They can't like tell you exactly where. We don't have like department store level tracking where you've got the beacons in store yet. Like that's not. I've never seen anybody do that in cannabis quite yet. But you can. Yeah, and you can. So you can do device IDs, and then you can also do like geo tracking and geofencing. And speaking of like creative solutions, like one thing I encourage people to do is like never take no for an answer when you're talking to mainstream technology providers. If they're like, hey, we don't work with cannabis, like, why?
Mhm.
Well, like, what can I do to help you work with me? Because I have, when I worked in retail, I helped launch the first billboard campaign in the cannabis billboard campaign in the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's fully illegal. I worked with private billboard owners, and we worked through the laws to make sure that we could do it. And I'm doing the same thing on the technology side. There's a company called like Placer, I think it's Placer AI, and they track through opt-ins, they track where customers are going, and they're just dipping into cannabis recently. So you can actually see, like, I'm working with this retailer in Detroit right now, but we found out through Placer that 50% or 48% of their customers come to their dispensary directly from their house. And so all of a sudden that's like a light bulb. Like we now know they're at the house, they're going straight to the dispensary. So we want to hit people when they're at their house. Yeah,
I did a project with Best Buy about 10 years ago. We put the beacons at the end of the tile, and that was able to track like how doing as well as consumer behavior. The other thing that was really interesting was actually as people were walking by the store, it would be targeted.
Yeah.
Back then, like it would be Bluetooth, but it always.
Yeah.
Also be a very interesting way of like hitting the
Yeah. I think some of it is budget constrained and we need, people come in and take some bets for those. One thing we hear from a lot of those traditional technology providers is, we've done some interesting things with brands where we're exploring some of these things and you try to get a partner in. What's the budget for the campaign? And then it has 2 zeros less than they thought it might willing to do it. But I do think we saw, just even an example of that's a good use of data, the geo data, pull people into a store, right? Foot traffic is really important. If I'm in a dense area, can I get somebody into my store? And that's a place where, especially with like cannabis tourism, brands can play really well. So a campaign we saw a couple of years ago that used geo targeting really well, partnership brand and retailer, was a drink company. And they geo segmented most of Denver, partnered with about a dozen stores, and then set up through programmatic, ads that would show if you were in this area that said, have you tried cannabis beverages? There's one in walking distance from you. Click here and it would pop up Google Maps walking directions. So the brand got the impression, they were able to advertise through channels that, you were likely to come out of a train station and be looking through your phone and, pop up and look for a restaurant or somewhere to get a drink. And it's like, try cannabis beverages. No, I haven't. And click here, there's one 2 blocks away. And that was a really good example of both brands and retailers partnering where brands want to get this message across. Retailers want the foot traffic. They're going to capture that entire ticket value. So it's worthwhile for the retailer to engage and using some geo data in there. But we saw it once and then, there's a lot of small experiments that.
Also, like with the beacons are really difficult for some of the smaller dispensaries because they have all of their stuff behind the counter.
Yeah.
And they have the empty stuff there and it's in the display. So even if you're traveling in the store is 500 square feet. So you're not going to have a spike type of beacon system, right? We might have one beacon that says you came to my store.
Yeah.
So it's really hard because I can't tell you how many, there's like the big dispensaries like Catalyst and Fola's in California, right? They have the bigger kind of stores, but then you have other small stores like an ATA or like super tiny, ATA is not super tiny, but you know what I'm saying, where a lot of stuff is behind the counter. So it's stuff like that because and like in Oregon, you can't keep any product on the floor at night. So you got to move everything to the back. And so there's all this regulation that normal stuff that would be great if we could do it, we don't have access to.
So with that, what are some types of technology and or data that we haven't maybe mentioned yet that might be on your wish list as a retailer or putting yourselves, Jeremy and Danny, into the shoes of your brand clients or your retail clients, and be aware that there are some investors and other tech companies in the audience here and on live stream. What would you want to share with them about what we are in need of in the industry?
I think inventory, I heard somebody say inventory yesterday, and I think there's a lot of work being done around better inventory tracking. We know there's tricks and challenges between the state systems and how accurate is inventory and how up to date is it. But we're talking about a lot of brand retail activations, right? What's the cardinal sin if I'm going to run an activation and put all of this time, energy, money behind it? Is if a consumer can't actually buy my product because it's out of stock. Anybody who is a brand or a retailer in this room has experienced a promotion where product has run out either sometimes before or during. And yes, there are, brands that are more like hype drop culture that want to create scarcity. Most of us don't, right? We want everybody to be able to get that product in their hand. If we're running an activation, if we're trying to get somebody to try, if we're trying to get that first customer getting to come back. So I think some of the planning data, I would just put it under the bucket of planning. There's so little planning that happens around this. Can I run a true activation and have a plan that includes the buyer ordering a predicted amount of product and having a good sense of what sell-through is going to be, and then moving that product. We talk about it a lot, and I still don't see people really planning at that level. Like predictive inventory, live inventory, a schedule of when something's going to run, and then how is it moving through, and did we hit that so we can adjust the knobs and do it again?
I think that's probably one of the biggest things I see too, especially on the retail side, a lack of that inventory data. But I will say there are a couple people actively working on it. Trees POS being one. Like Trees new retail insights are some of the coolest things I've seen from a POS company. You can now like see your sell-through rate, kind of predict when something's going to go out of stock, and more companies building that directly into the system that tenders and purchasing people are already working with, and not having to export it into Google Data Studio or some other BI tool is amazing. Like when I was on the retail side, 50% of my workday was spent exporting data and putting it, and then loading it into some other platform just so I could see it the way I want to see it. So now that, we're kind of moving into like this territory where POS systems are having to add value, like that's something I'm super excited about. And I've seen it from very few people. Trees is one of them though.
I think from a technology side, I want the POS systems and the retailers to understand that it is in their best interest to release the data to us.
Yeah.
And that means that building APIs for every brand, so that at the end of the day, my brand can see, I sold one thing today, that store needs some love. I sold 100 things today, I need to make sure I go and re-up them. So allowing the brands to be able to have their own dashboard, their own portal. And it's not hard. If you look at smart sheets, I can give a portal to every person that I have in my smart sheets. Why is this hard for us? It shouldn't be. And we shouldn't own that, like retailers should want us. If we had access to that, we would be helping themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think one important thing to keep in mind, and there might be some people that don't necessarily agree with me here, but some of those POS systems are also in the business of selling weed via their marketplace. So they don't want to give you that data.
Yep.
So you got to be careful who you partner with on the technology side, because they're holding
Really
that.
good point, actually.
Yeah, it's literally why I worked in the technology space. I would still be selling weed at a dispensary if I trusted a lot of these technology providers, but I didn't. So I came to the technology side to help build a platform that is actually for brands and retailers instead of holding that data hostage.
Yep.
And I think, we talk about this friction in who owns data and who has access to data. Jeremy, you're talking about like those inherent conflicts, even in the technology. We're seeing more and more vertical operators and MSOs that have in-house brands as well. And you start to see that pull back, right? It's already hard for a brand to get access to data. Well, now is that brand in competition with an in-house brand? And I just think about it from the standpoint of, if you're carrying the products, it's in everybody's best interest to sell through them. So any data that we can use to move products, like you already did the hard thing, it's already on the shelf, it's already in inventory, move it. That conflict's going to exist, and you're going to have to decide your product mix. And, but if you're a vertical operator and you're carrying somebody else's gummy and somebody else's pre-rolls, you already decided to carry it, move it. Get it in the hands of people, move it through, and don't be so protective of this data, because we have enough challenges in this space, and protecting data isn't going to solve for the bigger industry challenges.
Ophelia, please ask your question.
Just want to get up for. Work with a lot of retailers. The reason why we don't, let's say, we get emails every day saying access, say no. There's don't want you to know what we have, because we might not be able to afford it, right? Or we owe you money. So there is that too. But also a lot of mom and pops were legacy, so they went under where everything was silent. Right? We don't want to tell you what's going on, because we've been left over a lot of times.
Yeah.
But also with Jeremy, there's that bottleneck of that mom and pop store where there's no one who can read the data, even though you're giving it to GM, can never be. You can get a hold of it. And then there's the floor team manager, they don't know, or the floor manager, there's no one trained about your data. So that's something huge. And the attrition rate of people on them is so high, and you train them 3 months later, they.
Yep.
So there's a big bottleneck in the retail where wants to keep this, but they want this, they don't know how to use it, and you can't train them to stay long enough to.
Right. No, I think you're exactly right.
Analysts to lead or summarize the questions. So we last one.
All right. Yeah. So I think Ophelia was asking. Yeah, so I think Ophelia was asking about the challenges, not just around why people are protective of the data, but also who is best suited to use it, and is there anybody that can be trained with attrition to get up to speed on how to leverage that data? So even if you had it, is somebody going to use it, and is that going to be? One thing I would say to that is we are talking about a lot of data, and data can be overwhelming. What we're really talking about are actions and outcomes, and that's what you need to do. You need to put, I'm going to borrow, there's Happy Cabbage behind us. Andrew from Happy Cabbage says this all the time. You need to just put easy buttons in front of the retailers. The buyer needs an easy button. Click this button to do the things this week that are going to make us money. Here's a list of things I want to do for you. Can I place the API request and contact this system and reorder and do these things? And I just need to sign off approval because I thought through the things that are going to make you money this week, right? That's actually what this industry needs, because until we can have the staff, thank you 280E, until we can be staffed at the level that you would expect a retail store to be staffed at or a brand to be staffed at, you have to make things easy because you don't have humans to do it. And you don't have humans that are experienced in these roles. We still see it in cannabis. The average cannabis buyer has not been a retail buyer in retail. They were a head bartender a couple of years ago. You have to train them on these things. You really have to teach them, this is what you should be doing, but just make it super easy with actions that they can just click and someone, or better yet, automations that they can just run.
I think a lot of people are afraid to share data, and it comes from the legacy mindset. I've been there before, and I'm so much more open today than I was 10 years ago because I feel comfortable being open now, and I encourage people to share as much data as possible and not be afraid to do it. And one reason is because 90% of the people aren't even going to look at the data. So it's like, I know that I will look at the data and see trends that other people don't see. And I'm happy to share my data because it's going to benefit everybody if they care to look. But most people don't even care to look, and I wouldn't be afraid of giving data to a headset. They're not in the business of selling cannabis. They're in the business of helping you sell cannabis. There are other technology providers that people readily give up data to, POS and e-commerce, that are doing questionable things with their data. So I always find the headset one kind of funny because it's there's no conflict of interest with the headset as a company. Maybe there's other areas, but as a company, headset is just there to help empower you and make decisions. So I wouldn't be afraid of that one. But I think to answer your question, the best thing you could possibly do as a retailer or brand is invest in an employee that is data centric. And don't just rely on your GM or a bud tender to figure that out. Really find somebody who can dig in and extract value out of data. Because if you don't have somebody like that, it's just going to be overwhelming. There's so much to look at.
And literally, I feel what you've done is you've created an entirely new ancillary business. There's an entire ancillary business in having people who read your data and then give you the easy printout.
Yeah.
Because we have that currently in regular tech.
Yep.
In regular tech, but I worked at Verizon Wireless for many years. I worked at a lot of telecoms. I didn't have to read the data. There was somebody in the company that read the data and then sent me a really nice graph, and I was like, got it. So we don't have that in cannabis. So anybody here who wants to start a consulting company that you charge us a little bit of money, and I would pay you to read the data that Jeremy's reading.
We have time for one very quick question. Oh, we have to.
Okay.
But we can continue the conversation.
Well, thank you to our panelists for joining. Hope you guys found this useful, and we'll be here next.